eyes on the sky in the evening, noting the slow, yearly wheel of the constellations, Johnny knew he would have to escape. In about 3 weeks' time the year would be up. He had a horrible vision of Chrissy coming down the plains, and if she survived there, blundering onto the mine site. There were many obstacles. It would be almost insurmountably difficult given the search tools of the silos, but he set about planning his road to freedom with stubborn relentlessness. Complicating his plans were the self-set goal of the Earth free for silos and the resurrection of the human race. Lying awake, he saw the cage revealed in all its ugliness by a rising moon, and he almost ridiculed himself for his own timidity. Here he was, collared like a dog, chained up, locked behind bars, subject to swift detection and even swifter pursuit. Yet he knew that even if he died trying, he would have to do more than just try. First, he must escape. A key to possible freedom came to him only 2 days later. Freedom, at last, from the collar. For some reason, Turl had insisted that he be trained in electronic repair. The explanation Turl gave was very thin. Sometimes the controls of a machine might break. Sometimes the remote control systems went awry, and the operator had to handle it. That Turl had done the explaining was enough to disqualify the reason. But more than that, in all the time Johnny had been training on machines, he had never seen an operator touch electronic repair. When something went wrong, somebody came screeching in a tri-wheeled cart from the electronics section and fixed it pretty fast. That Turl insisted that Johnny know how to do it, Curl had not even, he'd never even objected it. It was one more piece of the puzzle that was Turl. Whatever Turl wanted of him eventually would happen somewhere. Somewhere there were no electronics repairmen. So Johnny sat, dwarfed upon the bench, learning circuits and diagrams, and of course components. They didn't give him too much trouble. The electrons went here, got changed, charged up, and then went there, and wound up doing something else over in this place. The little wires and components and pieces of binding metal all made pretty good sense. It was the tools that mystified him at first. There was a thing like a little knife that had a big handle, big for Johnny, small to a silo. That did the most remarkable thing. When you turned a switch to the proper number, he put the blade down on a piece of wire. The wire fell apart. When you reversed it and touched it to the wires, you're now holding together one more piece. It only happened when you were splitting or binding the same types of metal. You had to use a binding substance when handling two different types. When Kerr wandered off on one of his frequent snacks, Johnny was tied up alone for the moment to the electronics shop. He tested a tool against the frayed end of the leash. It came apart, cleanly cut. Johnny reversed the switch, held the cut pieces together, and touched the tool to it. They went back together with no trace of the cut. Johnny knew without trying it that it would do the same thing to his metal collar. He looked at the door to make sure Kerr was not coming back, and no one else would be coming in. And then he swept his eyes over the rest of the room. There was a tool cupboard at the far end. He knew better than to have the knife he was using vanish. Johnny parted his leash, raced to the tool cupboard and opened it. It was a messy pile of parts, wires, and tools. He rummaged in it frantically. Seconds sped past. Then he saw what he was looking for at the bottom, an old tool of the same kind. From far off he could feel the rumble of returning feet. He rushed back to the bench and with the newly found tool put his leash ends back together again. It had worked. Kerr returned, lazy and disinterested. Johnny had already slid the tool down into the cuff of his moccasin. "You're doing pretty good," said Kerr, looking at his work. "Oh, yes, I'm doing it pretty good," said Johnny. Turl was deep into the puzzle of nymph. Somehow the way Turl knew he had gotten onto something, and somehow, someway, he had screwed it up. The thing kept him awake nights and gave him a headache. For some of the things he now knew, he was after going to go and do something else. He had to have insurance of big leverage on nymph. He had lazied along with the fake mutiny measures. They weren't important anyway. He had caused a few battle planes on the mine sites to be flown and parked. He had picked up the arsenals and had them under seal. He had taken over control of the single remaining recon drone. On his last pass over the high mountains, he had gloated. The beautiful vein was still there, naked to the view, exposed 100 feet down a 2,000-foot cliff. Pure white quartz, studded with wires and knobs of gleaming yellow gold. A fortuitous earthquake had caused the cliff face to shear off and fall down at the dark depth of the canyon, exposing this wonderful fortune. The ancient volcano higher up must have spewed out a geyser of pure liquid gold in some ancient eruption, and then covered it shallowly. A stream had cut the canyon through the ages, and now the slide. The site had a few disadvantages. The approaches to it showed uranium in some form or another, which put it out of bounds for a silo. It rested in the cliff face so sheer that it could only be mined from a lowered platform. The rest of the 2,000 feet would gape dizzyingly below, and the canyon winds would batter at the mining stage. Room for machinery at the top of the cliff was minimal and very precarious. Several miners' lives would be expendable at such a site. Turl only wanted the cream of it. No mining in depth in the next pocket, just that pocket right there. The one that was exposed is all he cared about. There must be at least a ton of gold in sight. At silo prices, where very scarce gold ran at very high prices, it was worth nearly 100 million credits. Credits that could bribe and buy and open the doors to unlimited personal power. He knew how to get it out. He had even worked out how to transship it home. But to get it there undetected and to make it recoverable, that was what he planned. He looked at the recon drone photos again, and then falsified their date and place markings with a clever bit of forgery and hid them deep in otherwise innocuous boring files. To guarantee it, he needed leverage on Nymph. Then, in the event of any slip or mishap, he would be protected. There was also the matter of getting his 10-year sentence. He thought of it as a sentence, contracted down to just another year upon this cursed planet. Whatever Nymph had going involved Nype, and Nype's home planet post in accounting. Turl had gotten that far. He sat hunched over his desk, thinking. He needed leverage on the animal, and it would have to be big. Big enough to force the animal to dig without supervision, and not only that, to deliver. Well, this animal's learning was going well, and plans for other animals were in place. He would come up with something. Turl believed in his own luck. The animals would somehow, they'd do the job. Then he would have to just vaporize them all. And then the gold to home planet. The unknown was Nymph, with a single order, a simple order. Singular in intensity. He could have the animals dismissed, he could have them killed, or he could just simply withdraw permission to use the machinery. And soon the bumbling old fool, seeing no mutiny, would withdraw the blanket authorizations. The mutiny was too thin. Turl looked at the clock. It was within 2 hours of transshipment time. He got up, took off his breathe mask from a peg, and a few minutes later was walking to the transshipment platform. Turl stood there in the swirling dust and the din of transshipment time. The dispatch box courier had already been there, and the box, sealed and ready, lay in a corner of the platform. Char came over, interrupted in his preparations for transshipment firing and very unfriendly. Routine check of dispatch transmission, said Turl. Security business. He showed him the blanket authorization. You'll have to be you got to be fast, said Charles. No time to wait around. He was glancing at his clock. Turl scooped up the dispatch box, took it over to the car he had arrived in. He unlocked it with the master key, and he laid it on the seat. Nobody was watching. Char was back harassing blade machine operators and neating up the ore. Turl adjusted the button camera on his collar tab and speedily rifled through the sheaves. They were just routine reports, routine day-to-day recounting of operational data. Turl had done all this before, and it hadn't yielded anything. But there was always hope. The planetary director had to initiate everything. and sometimes added data and comments. The button camera whirled, and in short order every sheet had been recorded. Tyrrell put them back in the box, locked it, and took it over to the platform. "Everything all right?" said Char, relieved not to have another detail pushed too close to firing time. "No personnel, nothing," said Tyrrell. "When do you send the dead ones back?" He indicated the morgue. "Semi-annual, as always," said Char. "Get your car out of there. This is a big shipment, and we're in a hurry." Tyrrell went back to his office. Without really hoping, he put the report copies onto one screen, one after the other, studying them. He was only interested in the ones that had Nump's writing on them. Somehow, somewhere, there was a secret communication in those reports that only Knipe in accounting could decipher. Of that, Tyrrell was certain. There was no other way to get a communication back to home planet. When he finally got this, and when he finally got real leverage on the animal, he could launch his private mining mission. Tyrrell sat late, missing dinner, studying these and older dispatch box copies, until his amber eyes were dulled to a dim flicker. It was here someplace. He was certain of it. Collecting things that would aid his escape was not easy. At first, Johnny had thought he might handle the two button cameras that overlooked the cage, one inside and one outside. If he could bypass these, then at night he could open his collar and freely get about and prepare. He had spent valuable time studying button cameras in the electronics shop. They were a fairly simple device. They had a small mirror to catch the image, and the image became transmitted electrons. The pattern was simple. It was picked up and recorded upon a disc. There was no power to the button camera. Power was transmitted to it on a closed circuit from the receiver. He tried to modify his instruction machine to perform the same function. His object was to record a view of the cage with him in it. Then, with a quick switch over, he could leave the button cameras transmitting that picture while he himself was elsewhere. But there were two cameras, viewing from different angles. He only had one recorder. Tyrrell caught him one day with the instruction machine in pieces. He was bringing in a rabbit that he had shot. The monster stood there for a while and finally said, "Teach an animal a trick and it has to work on everything. I think you wrecked that playing machine." Johnny went on reassembling it. "Put it back together so it works so you can have this rabbit." Johnny ignored him, but when he had the machine back together, Tyrrell threw down the rabbit. "Don't monkey with things that don't need fixing," said Tyrrell, with an air of, "Good God, what you have to teach animals these days." But later Johnny got the break. The problem was body heat detection equipment. If in some way he could nullify such surveillance, then he hoped he could get to the mountains. He doubted he could be traced if the heat-seeking equipment could be fooled. Curl had him running a drill into the side of a mine shaft over the actual mine. It was an abandoned hole about 50 feet in diameter. Kerr had lowered the drill platform down into the hole. At that point, a rock outcropping was exposed. Under the platform was an ore net. The drill was heavy, having been built for silos. Johnny's muscles bulged as he bucked the bit into the outcropping. He had a phone in one ear and Kerr was chattering away into it. "Don't push steady. Just lean on it, let go. Time after time. After you've got a hole, make sure it's drilled. Trip the second trigger and the drill will expand and break off the ore. Keep the net in place and catch it as it falls. Now just keep that sequence going." "It's hot!" yelled Johnny, back up at him, and it was hot. The drill, spinning at high revs, was heating the wall, and in itself was almost glowing with friction. "Oh," says Curl, "you haven't got a heat protector." He fished around in his pockets amid papers and bits of old snacks and finally dug out a very small package. He put it in a lowering cup and let it down on a line. Johnny opened it up. It was a sheet of thin, transparent stuff. It had 2 sleeves. "Put it on!" yelled Curl. Johnny was amazed that so much area could be compressed in such a small package. "So thought my ex." Well, one of them. The garment was built for a silo, and the sleeves were enormous. And so thought my other ex. And it was much too long. He took some tucks here and put it over his head and down the front of his body. He resumed bucking the drill. I said bucking. It was amazing. The reflected heat from the wall and the drill bit did not reach him. After Kerr finally decided that Johnny could use the drill and handle the rig, Johnny was back upon ground level. He went through the motions of giving the heat shield back. No, said Kerr, throw it away. It's disposable. They get dirty and torn. Driller usually carries half a dozen with him. Don't know why I forgot about that, but I've been a driller in years. That's how I feel. 12 years. It's the only one I got, said Johnny. And you're sure a driller, says Kerr. Why, hey. Johnny neatly packaged it up and put it back in his pouch. He was betting that no heat detector could detect through it. If he wore it and kept it from gaping, the spinning scanner would be blind to it. He hoped, at least. The food problem he had solved. The smoked beef was compact and would keep him from starving if he was running so fast he had no time to hunt. He carefully patched up moccasins and made sure he had an extra pair. Turl observed that too. You don't have to wear those, you know, said Turl one evening as he came out to check on the cage locks. There are old Chinko boots that could be cut down. Didn't they give you any boots with your clothes? The following day, the compound tailor came out, complaining in his breathe mask and measuring Johnny for boots. I am not a bootmaker, he protested. But Turl had shown the blanket requisition, so the tailor also measured Johnny for a heavy knee-length overcoat and a coat with a cap. That sounds rather Germanic. It is coming on to summer, said the tailor. It's not the time of year for winter clothing. But he had done the measuring anyway, and very soon the boots and clothing were delivered to the cage. Freaky executives, the tailor had muscled during the final try-on, dressing up animals, kinky bastard. It made Johnny very uneasy that Turl was so obliging. He carefully checked all of his preparations. He just wanted to make sure they were whether or not they'd give away his plans to escape. He decided he was okay. Turl seemed very preoccupied these days. Indifferent. Or was that just a pose? The thing that was really giving Johnny a problem was how to get his hands on a gun. Before all the mutiny preparations, some of the workers had been seen wearing them. Some were relatively small and compact handguns at the belts, but he had supposed they had used them for plinking or shooting game. Turl still wore his, a rather bigger one, but the others seemed to have disappeared. Nobody's wearing them anymore. Johnny wondered how far he could trust Kerr. The midget was definitely Turl's creature, but from some of the tales Kerr had chatted on with, he was distinctly criminal. He told how he had rigged certain games of chance and how he had looted ore boxes as a joke, how he had gotten a female to believe her father needed money and relayed it for her. One day they were waiting for a machine to be idle so it could be used in practice, and Johnny had decided to make a test. He still had the 2 discs he had gotten in the Great Village. He knew now that one was a silvery coin and the other was gold. He took the silver coin out of his pocket and began flipping it. What's that? Said Girl. Johnny gave it to him. Carl scratched it with his hand. I dug some of these up, after that wreck in town. Yeah, on the southern continent. You must have gotten them locally, though. Why's that? Said Johnny. It's fake. An alloy of copper, nickel, silver plating. A real coin, and I saw some real ones, is solid silver. He handed it back, losing interest. Johnny took out the yellow coin and started flipping it. Curl caught it in the air before it could fall back into Johnny's hand. His interest was sudden and intense. Hey, where'd you get this? Curl dented it with a talon tip and looked at it closely. Why? Said Johnny innocently. Is it worth something? A very sly look came into Kerr's eyes. The coin he was holding and trying to be casual about was worth 4,000 credits. Gold, alloyed just enough to be usable in coinage, without any undue wear. Kerr studied his hand and steadied his grip, and looked very, very casual. Where'd you get this? Well, said Johnny, it came from a very dangerous place. There are more of them, said Kerr, quivering just a little bit. Just a little bit. He was holding in his paw 3 months' pay, all in one little coin. And as an employee, he could legally possess it as a souvenir. On Silo, it could buy a wife. He tried to remember how many coins it took for them to cease to be souvenirs and to become company property. 10? 13? So long as they were old and obviously made, not some fake made by a miner. The place is so dangerous one couldn't go there without at least a belt gun. Curl looked at him searchingly. Are you trying to get me to give you a belt gun? Would I do something like that? Yes, said Curl. The animal is very, very quick on machines, quicker in fact than silo trainees. Curl looked longingly at the gold coin, or medallion, or whatever it had been. He said nothing. Then he handed it back to Johnny and just sat there, his amber eyes shadowed, hiding within the depth of his breathed gas dome. Johnny took the coin back. I'm careless with these things, you know. I can't buy anything. Maybe you could keep on to it for me. Or maybe there's this hole just outside the cage. I could leave it in there. You know, just next to the door when you come in. I could hide it in that hole. Never know what might happen to it. Curtis sat there for a while. And then he said, the next machine is ready. But that night, while Turl was making his rounds on the mine site, there was a distant from his viewing screen. The gold coin disappeared from his hole where Johnny had put it, and the next morning, when Johnny dug there, covering the action with his body, a small handgun and some spare charges were in the hole instead. Johnny had a gun. A remaining hurdle was knowledge. The Chinkos were good teachers, and they could stack real learning onto a disc and get it assimilated like lightning flashes. But basically they had been working for silos and trying to teach silos, and they omitted a lot of things that silos either already knew or could not have much interest in. This left gaps. Johnny had picked up inferences that there was uranium in the mountains in the west. Mostly he had guessed this because no active mining ever seemed to have been done there. For the accident he had witnessed, and for other reasons, he suspected uranium was deadly to the silos, but he didn't know for sure, and he didn't know how. He was utterly dismayed in studying the text on electronic chemistry to find there are many, many different atomic formations of uranium. Sitting at his fire, grinding away at text on the instruction machine alternately, Johnny was disturbed by the ground shake that always preceded Turl. It was simply the monster's nightly rounds. What are you studying so hard, animal? Johnny decided to take a plunge, to take up a chance. He looked at the many feet from his chest to the girl's face. It's the mountains to the west, said Johnny. Turl looked at him suspiciously for a little while. There's not much in here about them. Turl was still suspicious. What had this animal guessed? I was born and raised there, said Johnny. There's data on mountains everywhere else on the planet, but hardly any on those right there. He pointed to where the faint moonlight shone on the bold snowcaps. The Chinkos made a lot of books out of the library. Man books. Are they here? Oh, man books. Turl was rather more pleased than otherwise. This fitted into his own concentrations. He left and came back shortly with a battered table and a disorderly armload of books that avalanched down upon it. They were frail books, very ancient, and some broke the backs or came apart with his mishandling. I am nothing but an animal attendant, said Turl. If mauling through this gibberish makes you happy, be happy! He paused at the cage door, and after he went out and locked it, just remember one thing, animal. The junk you'll find in those man books didn't have anything in them to defeat silos. Then he laughed. Probably lots of recipes on how to prepare raw rat, though. He rumbled off into the compound, all of a sudden becoming even more cockney. Johnny touched the books reverently, and then with hope he began to inspect them. They mostly concerned mining. His first find was a text upon chemistry. It contained a table of elements that gave him the atomic formation of every element man had known. With a sudden puzzlement, he grabbed a side text on electronic chemistry. It too had a table on the atomic formation of elements. He put them side by side in the flickering firelight. They were different. Both tables were apparently based on the periodic law by which the properties of the chemical elements reoccur periodically. You can really tell the guy who wrote it is a scientist. Well, the elements are arranged in increasing order by their atomic numbers, but there were elements on the round table that did not occur on the side of the table, and the side of the table had dozens more elements. The side of the table had also many more gases listed, and did not seem to specialize in oxygen. Johnny was floundering through it, not too adept at getting the abbreviations related to the substances, more used to reading English. No, he was more used to reading silo. Yes, the silos listed uranium and radium and even gave it an atomic number of 88. But they noted it was a rare element, and they had dozens of elements numbered and listed below and above 88. Nothing made it plainer than the difference in these tables that he was dealing with an alien planet in an alien universe. Some of the metals were compatible, but on the whole, the distributions and differentiations between the atomic formations seemed at variance. At length he suspected that both tables were imperfect and incomplete, and, with a spinning head, he gave it up. I don't blame you. He was a man of action, not Tinko. He turned to his next huge question. Were the uranium mines in the mountains? At length he found some charts and listings. He was certain that there must be uranium mines, man mines, in those mountains, but all he found were notations that where they had existed, they were all mined out. What? No uranium mines? Not active ones, anyway. Yet he was dead certain there must be uranium in those mountains. I mean, otherwise, why would the silos avoid them? Maybe they just thought there was. No, there must be uranium in those mountains. Some of his plans began to crumble at the edges, and he began to fall into something like despair. He began to search in the books, looking for any references at all to uranium. And then he hit, as Kerr would say, pay dirt of a sort. It was a book on mine toxicology, a subject he made out as poisons in mines affecting miners. And there it was in the index, uranium, radiation poisoning. For the next half hour he struggled through the entry. It seemed that you had better damn well be clothed in lead shielding. Otherwise, if you fool around with radium or uranium or any kind of radiation, all sorts of terrible things happen. Unless it's a spider, then you become a superhero. Rashes, hair falling out, burns, blood changes, and then he had it. People bombarded with radiation experienced changes in their genes and chromosomes. Birth defects and sterility resulted. Sounds rather like COVID. The COVID vaccine. That was when what was wrong. That's what's wrong with these people. They've been given the COVID vaccine. They're suffering from radiation sickness. That was why children seldom came out, and why those that did come out at birth were often imperfect. That was the reason for the lethargy. And they're so lethargic. And that could also be the red sickness and the crumbling away of his father's bones. It was all there. It described exactly what was happening to his people. Why they did not multiply. There was radiation in the village of Valley. He went back hurriedly to the mine map. No, there was not even a worked out uranium mine anywhere around the village. But radiation was what it was. Symptoms were unmistakable. He knew now why the silos stayed away from there. But if there were no mines, where was the radiation coming from? The sun? No, not that. Goats in the higher ridges had no trouble multiplying, and he had never seen a deformed goat. He tried going to Ireland. Well, he had an answer of sorts. It was not a cleaned out one. But there was a radiation, but no mines. It struck him abruptly that man must have had a way of detecting radiation. He seemed to know so much about it. Eventually he found that too. It was called a Geiger counter, after someone called Geiger, who was born and died on dates that Johnny had no trace of or inkling. It seemed that radiation or ionizing particles, if present, passed through a gas. The radiation generated a current in the gas and made a needle react like a gerbil. Radiation somehow generated a current in certain gases. The schematic diagrams were very unintelligible to him until he found a table that gave the abbreviations. He could then translate them across into silo, which he did very laboriously. He wondered whether he could make a Geiger counter. He decided, given the silo electronics shop, that he could. But after he escaped, that just wouldn't be available. Despair began to creep up on him. He finally put the books away, and in the small hours fell into an exhausted sleep. He had nightmares. Chrissy mauled and smashed to bits, his people wasted and truly extinct, and the world of the silos come alive and laughing at him. It wasn't the whole world of the silos that were laughing, just Turl. Mid-morning sunlight filled the cage and Johnny awoke. Turl was standing at the second table, turning over the man books and laughing. Johnny sat up in his robes. "You finished with this, like animal?" Got back to being a cockney. Johnny went over to the artificial pond and washed his face. La 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 la, splishy splash. A month back, he had persuaded Turl to keep a trickle running in so he could have some clean water at the intake. It was cold and it refreshed him. I'll stop doing sound effects now, sorry. There was a shattering crash in the air. I lied. And for a moment he thought something had blown up, but it was only the recon drone passing overhead. For some days now he had been making mid-morning sweeps. Curl had explained to him that what it was an ore detection activation surveillance craft, capable of making continuous pictures. It was regulated by remote control. All his life Johnny had seen such craft overhead, and I suppose they were natural phenomena, such as meteors or the sun alone. But those had passed every few days, and this one was passing daily. Better go for a dump. The old ones did not rumble in the distance as they approached and did not make an explosion as they went by. This one did. Curl hadn't really known why, but it had to do with speed, and they were very fast. You couldn't turn one in the air or stop one. You could only glide it. And it had to go all the way around the planet to get back. So this one, if it was the same one, was circling the planet daily. The harsh boom was very unpleasant. Turl looked up at it and then carefully ignored it. My site personnel didn't like it. "Why every day?" said Johnny, looking up at it. It was an element to his escape planning. It only took pictures, but that would be enough. "I said," said Turl, "are you finished with these books, boy?" "Not a man, geezer." The recon drone was fading, its rumble losing itself across the eastern plains. Its path had been from the mountains. Johnny made a breakfast of cold meat and water. Turl stacked the books up in his arms and went to the cage door. Turl halted indifferently. "If you're so keen on data about these mountains, there's a whole relief map of them in the library up in that town up north. You want to come and have a look at it?" He was instantly alert. Johnny nevertheless kept up with the breakfast. An accommodating Turl always had something else in mind. But this was a chance Johnny had scarcely dared hope for. In his planning, he had gone over ways to get Turl to take him out in the car. It would be a simple matter to throw a door catch, swing a blast of air into the car, hit the emergency stop button, and hold a gun on Turl. Desperate, but it was a chance. "I've got nothing to do today," said Turl. "Your machine training is ended. You might have a run to town, look at that relief map, do a little hunting, maybe look some more for your horses." A rambling Turl was not within Johnny's experience. Did the monster know something? "I want to show you something anyway," said Turl, "to get your things together. And I'll be by in about an hour, and we'll go and have a little ride. I've got to check some things. I'll be back. Be ready, animal." Johnny scrambled. This was a bit premature, but he didn't care. It was on time for him, and it upset his planning. But he looked on it as a heaven-sent chance. He had to get away. He had to get to his people, both to stop Chrissy, because she's a fit virgin 18-year-old, if she attempted to keep her promise, and to move the village to a safer place. There were only 2 weeks left before the constellation returned to its place. He put the small gun in his belt pouch and the metal cutter alongside his ankle. Packed a supply of smoked beef, he dressed in a buckskin. I said buckskin. When the hour was up, a vehicle rumbled into sight and stopped. Johnny stared at it, wondering what was going on. This was not the Mark III tank. It was a simple equipment truck normally used for transporting machinery. It had an enclosed pressurized cab. The back was large and open, surrounded by stakes. Its only similarity to a tank was that it had no wheels, but skimmed at varying distances up to 3 feet above the ground. Then Johnny realized that this might work to his advantage. It had no heat seekers, no guns. Turl got out and opened the cage. Throw your things into the back, animal, and ride in the back, animal. He unfastened the leash and boosted Johnny up over the tailgate. He took out a pocket welder and fastened the leash to the cab. This way, says Turl. I won't have to smell those hides. He was laughing when he got in the cab, took off his mask, and turned on the system. Suddenly, Johnny realized he had no way of immobilizing Turl. He couldn't even open the door on him. The truck skimmed away. It was slower than the tanks, and it was not as well cushioned against the ground, for it was now running very underloaded. Johnny held on, his head ducked below the forward cab level. The 80-mile-an-hour wind of passage roared over his head and against the truck's upright stakes. He was thinking fast. Somehow he could play this so he could get the truck as well. Its controls weren't any different to that. He was certain he could use it. All solid controls were simple levers and buttons. With a relief, it would be to get rid of this collar. His heart was thudding expectantly. Once again, if he made no mistakes, he would be free. It was no more than 1 o'clock when they thudded to a halt outside the library in town. Turl got out, shaking the vehicle with his weight. He was still conversational when he unfastened the leash. See anything of your horse, said Turl. Not a thing, said Johnny. Too bad, animal. This truck is the very thing to carry a horse, or 10 horses for that matter. Turl went to the library door and, with a tool, undid the lock. He gave the leash a yank. I said yank, and sent Johnny ahead of him. The place was a quiet tomb of dust, the interior the same as Johnny had last seen it. Turl was looking around. Ha, says Turl. So that's how you got in before. He was pointing to the disturbed dust under the window and the unchanged impressions of footprints across the floor. You even put the guard screens back. Ah, wow. Let's find data on those western mountains, shall we? Johnny was aware of the changes in himself. Those blotches of white he had seen before were signs, very plain and very easy to read. He saw that his previous visit had occurred beside the children's section, and that the shelves that he had first approached were marked Child Education. Wait a minute, says Turl. I don't think you know how to read a library index. Come over here, animal. He yanked on the leash. He let it run a bit long. He was standing by stacks of small drawers. That's what girls wear. Small drawers. No, never mind. He bent over and opened one. According to the Chinkos, every book has a card, and the card's all in here, and in these drawers. Alphabetical. Got it? Johnny looked at the drawers. Turl had pulled out one that said Q. The cards were musty and greyed, but legible. Anything here about mountains, said Turl? Tense as he was, Johnny had to repress a smile. Here was more proof that Turl couldn't read English. The drawer you have here is all about vehicles. Yeah, I can see that, said Turl. Go through it and find mountains. He moved off elaborately, interestingly in looking at other stuff in the ancient posters on the wall, still holding the leash. Johnny started opening drawers. Some were stuck, others the front tabs missing, but he finally found the drawers for in. He began to go through the cards. He came to modern military science. I found something. Can I have your pen to write down numbers? I don't know why he's from the north all of a sudden. Turl handed him a pen several sizes too big for Johnny's hand, and then gave him some folded sheets. Turl wandered off again. Johnny wrote down the numbers of several books. I have to go over there to the shelves now. Turl paid out more line. After a little while, and after a minor battle with a ladder that had sunk into the floor and got stuck, Johnny got up to a higher shelf and raised the protective sheet. In a moment he was swiftly scanning through a section of books headed Defense Systems of the United States. Anything about that is, Turl? Johnny bent down and showed him a page entitled MX1 Anti-Nuclear Silos. Yep, said Turl. Johnny handed him the book. We better take this one. There's more to have. In rapid order, he fought the ladder along the shelves and took out another half-dozen books. Nuclear physics, congressional hearings on missile installations, the scandals of nuclear mismanagement, nuclear deterrent strategy, uranium, hope or hell, and nuclear waste and pollution. There were more, but he had felt rushed, and the 7 books were heavy for a man about to run. "I don't see any pickies," said Turl. Johnny quickly pushed the ladder along. He grabbed the book. "Colorado, Scenic Wonderland," glanced at it and gave it to Turl. "That's more like it, animal." Turl was pleased with the gorgeous views of mountains, particularly since many were purple and the aging ink had turned bluish. "That's more like it." Turl put the books away in a sack. "Let's see if we can locate that relief map." He gave the leash a yank that almost tumbled Johnny off the ladder. But Turl didn't lead the way to another floor right then. He wandered over to the door first and seemed to be listening. Then he came back and went up some stairs. There was the relief map laid out on display, possibly not a permanent fixture. Turl knelt down and looked at it searchingly. Johnny, keyed up as he was made very uneasy by the coloured relief map. It showed the nearby mountains, very accurately by his estimations. The passes and high peak were plain, and there was the meadow in the village in plain sight. Of course, the map had been made ages before there was even a village, but still, there it was. It made Johnny nervous. He knew the recon drone must have spotted it long ago, and Turl undoubtedly had pictures of it. There also was a long canyon, and Johnny knew he was looking at the location of what he had taken to be an ancient tomb. He looked at it closely, and he couldn't risk calling it to Turl's attention. No, there was no tomb or anything else marked at the head of that canyon. As a slight diversion, he traced out his finger of the letters. Rocky Mountain, Pikes Peak, Mount Vale. Not too depressing. Then he saw that he needn't have bothered to dissemble. Turl's attention was glued on the deep, long canyon. A talon was carefully tracing a cliff face, the river below it. The monster, seeing Johnny was watching, quickly traced some other canyons in the same way, but he came back to that one canyon. Turl stiffened for a moment, head jerking up. Then he became very bland. "See no you want, animal?" Johnny was happy to get away from him, and get him away from the relief map as well. He was too much like Turl staring down at his own people. Turl went down the stairs toward the front door, pools of ancient dust stirring as he walked. The sound of their footsteps had obscured it. Johnny was certain he had heard the hoof strike of a horse. Turl was standing just outside the library, looking down the grass-grown street. Johnny shifted his position to see what Turl was looking at. He went rigid with shock. 100 yards away, there was Winspeter, and somebody was on him, and 3 other horses behind him. Turl was just standing there, watching the street. The moment had come. It was not coordinated, but Johnny knew he was having his last chance. He snapped the metal tool out of his ankle cuff, slashed the lease. It parted. Like a streak of light, Johnny sprinted past the door, past Turl, past the library. Suddenly, yanking talons caught the buckskin. It ripped. Zigzagging like a hare, Johnny headed for the nearest tree cover, momentarily expecting a pistol blast in the back. He halted with his back braced against the broad aspen. It was Chrissy. Not only Chrissy, but Jailbait. A sob surged up through Johnny. Chrissy's glad, crying out, "Johnny!" Patty yelled out, "Johnny! Johnny!" And Winspeter started to trot forward. "Go back!" screamed Johnny. "Run! Oh my God, run!" They halted, perplexed in their gladness about seeing him, and turning into alarm. At a distance behind Johnny they could see a thing. They started to turn the horses. Johnny crouched and whirled. Tony was still standing by the library door. Johnny grabbed the handgun from his pouch. Threw the safety off. He let the handgun show. "If you fire on them, you're dead," he shouted. Turl just stood there. There was a turmoil of horses behind Johnny. He risked a glance back. Winspeter had reared. He had seen no reason not to approach his master. He was fighting to come forward. "Run, Chrissy, run!" screamed Johnny. Turl was walking forward, rumbling, indolent. He had not drawn his own gun. "Don't ride up closer," called Turl. "Stand where you are," shouted Johnny, "or I'll shoot." Turl leisurely strode forward. "Don't get them hurt, animal." Johnny stepped out from behind the tree. The handgun was extended. He was sighting it on Turl's mask tube. Be reasonable, animal. Turl spoke, but he didn't stop walking. You knew they would be here today, said Johnny. Yeah, said Turl. I've been tracking them by recon drone for days, ever since they left your village. Put the gun away, animal. Behind him, Johnny could hear the horses milling. If only they would run. Turl paused, staying clear of his own gun, was reaching for his breast pocket. Stay still, or I'm going to shoot you, says Johnny. Well, animal, you can go ahead and do that if you want. But the electrical connector has a dummy wire in it. Johnny looked at the gun. He took a deep breath and lined it up. He clenched the trigger. Nothing happened. Turl finished the motion, going to his breast pocket. He took out the gold coin and tossed it in the air and then caught it. I, not Curl, sold you that gun, animal. Johnny pulled a kill club from his belt. He braced himself for a charge. Turl's paw motion was swifter than the eye. His belt comes out. He fired a sharp bark, and a human scream racketed behind Johnny. He glanced back. A pack horse was down, thrashing. Your friends will be next, says Turl. Johnny lowered his club. That's better. Now help me round up these creatures so we can get them in the truck. The truck bumped southward with its cargo of freight and despair. Collared and cinched up to the bracing, Johnny looked over at the scenery, the scene in the truck, and he was miserable. Patty, bruised from a fall in the melee, was sitting bolt upright, arms lashed to her sides and her back lashed to the truck stake. She was in shock and her face was grey-white. She was now 8 years old. The wounded horse, still bleeding from a deep blast penetration in its right shoulder, still burdened with its pack, lay on its side, legs kicking slightly from time to time. Turl had simply picked it up and dumped it into the truck bed. Johnny worried that it might kick out and break the left leg of another horse. It was the one of Johnny's own string, named Blodgett. The three other horses were snubbed tight to the truck rails, and their nostrils were flaring in fear as the plane fled past below the vehicle. Chrissy was lashed to her brace across from Johnny. Her eyes were shut. Her breathing was shallow. Questions had surged in Johnny, but he blocked them from his tight lips. His own plans looked futile to him. He blamed himself for delaying his escape. He might have known that Turl had all worked out. Hatred of the monster choked in his throat. At length Chrissy opened her eyes and looked at him. She saw he was watching Patty. I couldn't leave her, said Chrissy. She followed and I took her back twice, but the third time we were too far gone on the plains. It was better to go on. Just rest, Chrissy. The horse Blodgett moaned as the truck banged over some rough ground. I know I was early, but Winspitcher came home. He was on the plain below the pass, and some of the boys were out to drive cattle, and they saw him and Dancer, and they brought them in. Dancer was the lead horse Johnny had taken, a mare. Chrissy was quiet for a while, and then Winspitcher had a fresh scar on him, like a puma had raped him, and it looked like perhaps he might have run off and left you. I thought maybe you were hurt. Yes, Johnny thought. Winspitcher could have wandered back last year, and when he tried to go through the passes, found them blocked with snow. He would have wandered back to the winter on the plains, and then followed by Dancer. There's a deep furrow now healing on Winspitcher's rump. It's all right, said Johnny soothingly. I couldn't stand the idea of lying there. Of you lying there hurt, Johnny. The truck bumped on for a while. Johnny, there was a great village, said Chrissy. I know. Johnny, that's a monster, isn't it? She twitched her head toward the cab. Yes, said Johnny. It won't hurt you. And he lied to calm her. I heard you speaking its language. It has a language, and you could talk it. I've been its captive for almost a year, said Johnny. What will it do? To Patty? She's not lubricated. And to us? Don't worry too much about it, Chrissy. Yes, God alone knows what the monster would do. He's got girth. There was no reason to tell her this, and it messed up his own escape. He couldn't tell her that. It wasn't her fault. It was his own. He had delayed too long. The truck swerved across a broken bridge and jolted on. Johnny decided he had better tell her something to calm her down. It apparently wants something from me. I will have to do it now. It won't really harm you, just threats. When I've done whatever it is, it will let us go. He didn't like to lie. He had felt all along that Turl would kill him when he had served his unknown purpose. Chrissy managed a shaky smile. I would to shim some as parson and mare now. He got through the winter okay, but we only ate 2 of your horses. That's good, Chrissy. I made you some new buckskin, she said. They're in that pack. Thank you, Chrissy. Patty, her eyes dilated, suddenly screamed, It's going to eat us! No, Patty, said Johnny. It doesn't eat living things. It's all right, Patty. She subsided. It's going to eat me. Johnny, said Chrissy. You're alive. That's amazing, Johnny. Tears welled up in her eyes. I thought you were dead. Yes, he was alive. They were alive. But he didn't know for how long. He thought of Turl breaking the legs of the cattle. The truck rattled through an expanse of brush. Johnny, you're not mad at me, are you? Oh, dear God, mad at you? Oh, God, no, he couldn't talk. He shook his head. The roar of the mine became louder in the distance. They had been left in the truck throughout the chilly night. Turl had simply put a couple of button cameras on it, one at each end, and gone off to his quarters. But it was mid-morning now, and Turl had been bustling about the cages since before dawn. Johnny had been unable to turn his head to see what was doing. The collar and leash had never been so tight. Turl came back to the truck and dropped its gate. He led the horses out and tied the lead ropes to a tree. Then he boldly and bodily shoved the wounded horse off the truck. When it hit the ground, shoved it further out of the way. It was trying to stand, and he cuffed it, knocking it back down again. He came onto the bed and unfastened Patty. He had a collar in his paw, and he clamped it around Patty's throat. He pulled out a welding torch and welded it shut, and then welded a lead to it. Picking up the little girl with one swoop, he went off with her. Presently he came back. Chrissy shrank away from him. He had another collar, and he welded it on. Johnny had a closer look at it and the leash that was fashioned. This collar was a red bulge on its side. Johnny realized that Patty's had one too. Turl looked at Johnny's eyes. They were ice blue and deadly. You turn in a moment, animal. Don't worry, your turn soon. No need to be cross. A whole new life is going to open up before you. He scooped up Chrissy and packed her off the truck. He was gone for some time. Johnny heard the cage door opening and shutting, although being tested. Then the truck rocked as Turl's enormous weight came onto it again. He looked down at Johnny. Any more dummy wires, he said. You sure you're not sitting on a blast rifle that has its action dummy wired? Turl laughed at his own joke. You know, I'm going to knock the crap out of her for not teaching you any better. He was fumbling with Johnny's leash and lashing. Rat brain. The recon drone rumbled in from the distance and passed over with an ear-splitting roar. Johnny glared at it as it passed. Good, said Turl approvingly. You know what spotted her, so you know what will spot you now. If you get up to anything I don't like, beautiful pictures we get off that thing, tiniest detail, and 8-year-old buds. Get off the truck. Johnny was yanked toward the edge. Turl had indeed been busy. Several things had changed. One of them was his instruction machine and table. It now sat outside the cage. Turl yanked him to a halt. Chrissy and Patty were tied to an iron rod that had been inset into the side of the pool. Chrissy was trying to massage some feeling back into Patty's arms and legs. The little girl was crying with the pain of the returning blood. Now, animal, says Turl, I am giving you a briefing tour, so pay very close attention. Turl pointed to an electronic connector box on a nearby wall. His talon indicated a heavy wire coming from it that led to the top of the bars of the cage, wound around each one, enclosed the whole cage high up and returned to the box. Each cage bar now had insulator wrappings around the bottom. Turl yanked Johnny over to a clump of bushes. A coyote was lying there, its head muffled in wrappings, snarls coming from it. Turl put on an insulator glove, picked up the coyote. Now tell those two other two animals in there to watch very carefully. Johnny said nothing. Well, don't matter. I see they're watching anyway. With a gloved paw, Turl held up the struggling coyote and launched it at the bar. There was a searing puff of light. The coyote screeched. An instant later, it was a charred, crackling mess on the bars, turning black. Turl chuckled. Animal, tell them if they touch those bars, that is what will happen. Johnny told them, never touch the bars. Next, says Turl, taking off the glove and putting it in his belt, we have a real treat for you. Turl reached into his pocket and took out a compact switch box. Know where your remotes? You know about remotes? Yeah? Remember the remotes, animal? Remember your tractor? This is a remote. He pointed at the two girls. Now look closely and you will see they are wearing a different kind of collar. See that red bulge? No, not my red bulge. Their red bulge on the side of their collars? Johnny did, all too clearly. He felt sick. That, said Turl, is a small bomb. It is enough to shatter their necks and blow their heads off. Understand? Animal. Johnny glared. This switch, Turl said, pointing to the remote control box, is the small animal. This switch, he pointed to the other, sets on the collar on the other animal. This box. What's the third switch? Says Johnny. Well, thank you for asking, Governor. I didn't think I was getting through to your little rat brain. This third switch ignites a general charge in the cage you do not know the location of, and it'll blow the whole lot up. Turl was smiling behind his faceplate, his amber eyes slitted, flickering, watching Johnny. At length he continued, this control box is always on my person. There are two other remotes in places you don't know about. Now, is all that very clear to you, animal? Oh, it's very clear to me, says Johnny, repressing his shaking anger. That one of the horses can come over and get electrocuted. It's also clear that you could accidentally trip those controls. Animal, we are standing here jabbering and omitting the fact I truly befriended you. Johnny was instantly alert. Turl took out a metal cutter and snipped off Johnny's collar. He then mockingly handed him the remains of the leash. Run around, says Turl. Feel liberty. Frisk! Turl moves off and started picking up some odds and ends of tools that he had strewn about whilst working. The stench of the electrocuted coyote was rank in the air. And what do I pay for this? Says Johnny. Turl came back. Animal! Animal! You must have realised by now that in spite of your little rat brain, that your best course is to cooperate with me. In what way? That's better, animal. I like to see gratitude. In what way? The company has some projects that need doing. They're very confidential, of course, and you are standing there pledging your full cooperation, right? Johnny looked at him. And when they're all done, says Turl, why, when they're all done? Why, I will just stagger you with gifts, and you can return to your mountains. With them, pointing at Chrissy and Jobby. Of course, with your four-legged companions as well. Johnny knew a false Turl when he saw one. Of course, said Turl. If you try to get away, which I think by now you will find impossible, or if you try to mess up me, or mess up my plans, or if you don't succeed, well, it's very easy. Click, one dead, click, two dead, and then maybe I just blow the whole place up. Now, do I have your promise of cooperation? Okay, move around, all I please. Of course, animal. I'm tired of hunting rats for you. And I'm sure not going to hunt rats for those two baits in there. Turl laughed the soul of joviality. I can go into the cage when I'm standing outside with my little remote control box watching? Yes. I can ride around the country. As long as you wear this, says Turl. He pulled out of his pocket a button camera with a loose neckband and dropped it over Johnny's head. If it shuts off or gets beyond a 5-mile range, Well, I just pushed the first switch. You're a monster. You're a devil. But Turl saw clearly he had won. So you promise? Johnny dejectedly looked at the remote control box, the bulge within Turl's pocket. He looked at the two girls, Chrissy and Jarbate, who were now gazing at him trustingly. I promised to get the project done, said Johnny. It was as far as he could be stretched. That's why I used lube. But it was enough for Turl. He almost gaily tossed his tools into the back of the truck and drove off. Johnny walked over to the cage, careful not to touch the bars, and began a cautious, low-key explanation of what was going on. He felt like a cheat as he did so. If ever he had seen treachery, it had been in Turl's eyes.